Maria never planned to cross the line. She was smart, professional, and had spent years building a spotless reputation. But that night, under the glow of city lights she didn't recognize, everything changed. It started with a knock. At 11:43 p.m., standing outside her hotel room, was David, her boss. The man she had admired from afar. The man she knew was strictly off-limits. Her hand hesitated on the doorknob. She knew opening it meant trouble. The kind of trouble that couldn't be undone. But temptation doesn't knock twice. And in a city where no one knew their names, one night could cost her everything. Her job, her reputation, and maybe even her heart. Maria Reyes wasn't the type to break rules. Smart, organized, and quietly ambitious, she had built a solid reputation as a top project coordinator in the company. While others craved attention, she let her work speak for itself. She moved through the office with a quiet confidence, always polished, always in control. But beneath that calm exterior was a woman with fire, one who noticed far more than she ever let on, especially when it came to him, David Carrington. Her boss, the man whose presence could shift the entire atmosphere of a room. He was everything people whispered about behind closed doors, sharp, disciplined, fiercely intelligent, and cold. Or at least, that's what most people believed. But Maria had seen something different. A flicker behind those storm-gray eyes. A momentary softness when he looked out the window longer than necessary. A quiet sigh when no one else was listening. She never dared to imagine what it meant, until Chicago. It was supposed to be a straightforward trip. 2 nights, 3 meetings, and 1 critical deal with a high-profile international client. Maria had reviewed the brief a dozen times, packed only business-appropriate clothes, and prepared herself for long hours and early mornings. This wasn't a vacation. It was business, pure and simple. But the city had its own plans. Chicago greeted them with unexpected warmth for a late fall afternoon. Their hotel overlooked the river, sleek and modern, with high ceilings and dim lighting, that made everything feel just a little more dangerous after sunset. The air smelled like rain and ambition, and from the moment Maria stepped into the lobby, she felt something shift. For the first time in years, she was away from the watchful eyes of the office, away from routine, from roles, from rules, and David, buttoned up, untouchable David, seemed different here, more human. His guard, though still intact, looked thinner. Like the city itself had started peeling back the layers. In meetings, he still spoke with authority, his voice calm and commanding. But during dinner with clients, his laughter was looser. His gaze lingered a second too long. When he handed her a glass of wine, their fingers brushed, and neither of them pulled away. Maria tried to dismiss it, blame it on the change in scenery, jet lag, the charged energy of a high-stakes deal, but something unspoken had started to build, quietly, steadily, between them. And in a city where no one knew their names, where the night was longer and the rules felt less permanent, that unspoken thing was about to become impossible to ignore. The restaurant buzzed with quiet sophistication, dim lighting, leather booths, and the soft clink of crystal glasses. The client had chosen one of Chicago's finest steakhouses, a place where deals were sealed with aged wine and smiles that said more than words ever could. Maria sat across from David, their international client to her right, laughing over some story involving Paris, a delayed flight, and a very angry customs officer. Maria smiled, nodding politely, but her focus kept drifting, sideways, toward him. David hadn't said much during dinner. He never did in social settings like this. Instead, he observed, sharp eyes watching every shift in tone, every raised, brow, every opportunity. He had a way of being silent and commanding all at once. Tonight, though, something felt different. Maybe it was the wine, or the warm glow of the restaurant, or the way David's eyes kept flicking toward her when he thought she wasn't looking. The waiter approached to refill glasses, and as Maria reached to lift hers, her hand accidentally nudged the base of the stem. It wobbled, started to tip. Before it could spill, David's hand shot out, steadying the glass just in time. Their fingers touched, just for a moment. But in that single electric second, Maria's breath caught. His hand lingered a heartbeat too, long, just long enough to make it clear it wasn't purely instinct. Just long enough to say what neither of them had dared to put into words. When she looked up, their eyes met, and neither of them looked away. It wasn't the kind of look people exchanged in front of others. It was the kind of look that should have been impossible in public, the kind that burned just beneath the surface, smoke without fire, but smoke thick enough to suffocate. Maria finally turned back to the client, laughing at something she hadn't really heard. But her mind wasn't on the conversation anymore. Her heart was racing, and her skin was tingling from the echo of that touch. Later that night, after they had walked the client to a waiting car, the two of them strolled in silence back toward the hotel. The air was crisp, the sidewalks glistening from an earlier drizzle. Streetlights reflected in puddles like shards of broken gold. David walked beside her, his hands tucked in his coat pockets. His expression was unreadable, serious, thoughtful, until he spoke. "You're different here," he said, voice low and almost lost in the wind. "More alive." Maria stopped walking. Those words hung between them like fog, soft, heavy, impossible to ignore. She looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, offering a faint smile, the kind he never used in the office. "I don't know. You just seem lighter, like you're not carrying so much." Maria didn't know what to say. She felt exposed, seen in a way that was far too personal. She could have deflected. She should have laughed it off. But she didn't. Instead, she met his gaze, and for the first time, she didn't try to hide the flicker in her eyes. "I guess it's easier to breathe when you're not being watched all the time," she said, softly. David didn't reply. But the silence between them grew dense with something unspoken, dangerous, magnetic. And for the first time, the night air had grown colder, the kind of chill that seeped through coats and curled around your skin. Maria and David had just turned the corner near the hotel when the sky cracked open without warning, a sudden downpour. Not the gentle, misty kind, but a full, wild rush of rain, as if the city itself had decided to pour out every bottled-up emotion at once. Maria squealed in surprise as the first heavy drops splashed across her shoulders. Within seconds, her hair was soaked, clinging to her cheeks. David laughed, a sound she rarely heard from him, deep and genuine, as he grabbed her hand without thinking. "Come on," he shouted over the roar of the rain. They ran, through empty sidewalks and glistening crosswalks, shoes slapping against wet pavement, two figures lit by the soft gold of street lamps. They ducked beneath the hotel's awning, breathless and drenched, but laughing like they hadn't in years. Maria leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath, her clothes clinging to her in all the wrong places. Her hair dripped water onto her blouse, and her mascara, if still intact, was definitely living on borrowed time. David turned to her, eyes dancing. "You look like a disaster," he teased, his voice low and warm. She gave him a mock glare. "I blame you." A beat passed. Then they both laughed again, quieter this time. Closer. Inside the elevator, the mood shifted. The laughter faded into something softer, heavier, more aware. Water trickled from Maria's hair down the curve of her jaw. David watched her, then without a word, shrugged off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. The fabric was warm, heavy with the scent of his cologne, clean, masculine, unmistakably him. She looked up at him, startled by the gesture. "Thanks," she whispered. He only nodded, but his gaze held hers. Neither of them looked away. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, but neither moved at first. It was as if stepping out would shatter whatever delicate moment they were suspended in. Finally, Maria stepped into the hallway, the soft click of her heels on the carpet the only sound. David followed beside her, saying nothing. They stopped in front of her door. Maria reached for the keycard but paused when she felt his presence still close behind her. The quiet stretch between them, charged with the weight of things neither of them had spoken, things they had both been trying to ignore since the moment they landed in Chicago. And then David said it, barely above a whisper. "Can I come in, just for a minute?" Maria froze. The words weren't aggressive. They weren't even confident. They were careful, vulnerable. A question, not a command. She turned toward him slowly. For a second she said nothing. Just searched his face, the rain still glistening in his hair, his jaw tight with restraint, his eyes filled with something dangerously close to longing. She could say no. She should say no. But instead, she opened the door. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a bedside lamp she'd forgotten to turn off earlier. Soft yellow light spilled across the floor as they stepped in. She closed the door behind them, and suddenly the silence became deafening. Maria turned to face him. They stood a few feet apart, the tension between them so thick it felt like a physical force. David stepped closer, slowly, like he was giving her the chance to stop him. She didn't move. He reached up, brushing a damp strand of hair away from her cheek. His fingers lingered. Maria's breath caught. And then, just like that, he kissed her. It wasn't careful. It wasn't planned. It was raw and immediate, full of everything they'd been holding back for too long. His lips met hers in a crash of emotion. And for a second, Maria stood frozen. But then something in her gave way. She reached for him, pulling him closer, her hands tangled in the lapels of his jacket. The kiss deepened, hungry, searching, as though they were both trying to say everything they couldn't put into words. Every moment of restraint from the office, every unspoken glance, every time their hands brushed but didn't linger, it all poured out now. They broke apart for air, eyes wide, breathing hard. But the space between them didn't last long, because once the line had been crossed, there was no going back, not tonight, and maybe not ever. The door clicked shut behind them, but neither Maria nor David moved immediately. The room was dim, lit only by the golden halo of a lamp in the corner. Their clothes were damp from the rain, their skins still tingling from the chill outside. But the heat between them now made everything else disappear. And then they moved. Together. There were no words. No logic. Just a rush of breath and the magnetic pull that finally overcame restraint. David cupped her face with both hands, his lips crashing against hers like he'd been holding back for far too long. Maria responded just as fiercely, her fingers curling into his shirt, pulling him closer, anchoring herself to something she couldn't explain. They stumbled backward toward the bed, caught in a storm of urgency, kisses deepening, hands exploring, boundaries evaporating. There was no hesitation anymore. No workplace titles, no consequences. Just two people caught in a moment too powerful to resist. His jacket dropped to the floor. Her blouse followed. Each layer shed felt like a secret finally released. With every touch, every gasp, they unraveled the distance they'd kept for so long. Logic melted. Rules dissolved. It was reckless, forbidden, but it felt more real than anything had in years. When they finally sank into the sheets, tangled in warmth and breathless surrender, the room seemed to fall completely silent, except for the soft rhythm of their hearts, still racing in sync. David's fingers traced a line down Maria's spine, slow and reverent. She was curled beside him, the blankets gathered loosely around her, skin glowing in the low light. He tucked a damp strand of hair behind her ear, then let his hand linger against her cheek. For a moment, he didn't speak. And then, quietly, like it cost him something to admit it, he said, "I've wanted this longer than I care to admit." Maria's eyes opened. The words hit her harder than any kiss, because they weren't casual, they weren't smooth, they were honest. She didn't know how to respond, not right away. So she reached for his hand instead, lacing her fingers with his, letting silence do what language couldn't. They lay there like that for a while. Not lovers sneaking around, not coworkers who had made a mistake, but two people who had just crossed a line they couldn't uncross, and didn't want to. Outside, the rain softened to a whisper against the window. Inside, wrapped in David's arms, Maria didn't feel afraid. Not yet, because for one fragile night, it felt like something real had begun. The first thing Maria noticed was the silence. The second was the cold side of the bed. David was gone. Her heart sank before she even opened her eyes. She reached for her phone, still on the nightstand, blinking against the soft morning light seeping through the curtains. A single notification glowed on the screen. David. Meeting at 9. Don't be late. That was it. No good morning. No follow-up. No sign that the night before had been anything more than a mistake. Maria sat up slowly, the events of the night rushing, back in vivid flashes. His lips, the heat of his hands, the way he'd whispered her name like it meant something. Like she meant something. And now it felt like none of it had ever happened. She wrapped herself in the hotel robe, suddenly aware of how bare she felt beneath it. Not just physically, but emotionally. Vulnerable. Exposed. She didn't regret what happened. Not fully. But the ache in her chest told her she hadn't been prepared for this emptiness either. By the time she entered the conference room, Maria had her armor back on. Hair tied neatly, lipstick in place, blazer buttoned up like a shield. David was already there, standing at the head of the table, reviewing presentation notes with the same sharp focus he always carried. He looked up when she walked in. Their eyes met, for less than a second. And then, nothing. No flicker of emotion. No warmth. No acknowledgement, just a clipped "morning," before he turned back to the client. Maria forced a smile, taking her seat beside him. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened her laptop. She wasn't sure if anyone else noticed. Probably not. But she noticed everything. David didn't look at her again during the meeting. Not once. He spoke with his usual calm authority, answered questions, made his points with precision. He was flawless, professional, and completely detached, like the night before had never happened, like she had never happened. Maria sat in silence, nodding where appropriate, contributing when necessary. But inside, Her thoughts spun in 1,000 directions. Had she imagined the way he looked at her? The way he touched her? Had it all been a lapse in judgment, his and hers, sealed off by the sunrise and buried under a corporate agenda? Or worse? Was this just how he operated? Get close, cross a line, then retreat into business as usual like nothing ever mattered? For the first time in a long time, Maria felt small. And in a city that had briefly felt like freedom, she now felt trapped. Back in the role she had worked so hard to perfect. Quiet. Controlled. Unseen. But under the polished surface, her heart whispered one impossible question. Was it really nothing to him? Or was he just as afraid as she was? The days that followed were quiet. Too quiet. Maria buried herself in reports, client calls, and polite smiles. But inside, she felt like something vital had gone missing. The hotel room was far behind them. Now, the city lights of Chicago replaced by the sterile glow of office fluorescence. Yet, the memory of that night refused to fade. When she finally walked into HR and submitted a formal request to transfer off David's project, she did it without hesitation. It was the only way to protect herself. To rebuild the lines she had, so carelessly erased. But she didn't expect the knock on her office door just hours later. "David wants to see you," her assistant said softly. Maria stood, smoothing the front of her blouse. Her heartbeat quickened as she walked down the hallway. She told herself to stay composed, to keep her walls up this time. But the moment she stepped into his office and closed the door behind her, she knew this wouldn't be another polite conversation. David was already standing, hands in his pockets, his jaw tight, his eyes heavy with something that looked a lot like regret. "I heard about the transfer," he said quietly. Maria nodded. "It's for the best." He stepped closer. "Is it?" She didn't answer. There was a long silence, thick with everything they'd left unsaid. Then David exhaled, shaking his head. "I messed up, Maria," he said. "I thought keeping distance would protect us. Protect you. But all I've done is push you away." His voice was rough around the edges, stripped of the calm, composed persona he always carried. Now he just looked like a man who was tired of pretending. Maria looked at him, her heart aching. "What do you want from me, David?" There was no hesitation. "Everything," he said. "Not just one night. I want all of your mornings, too." Her breath caught. The room fell silent again. But this time it wasn't cold or awkward. It was warm, charged with something tender and new. David took a step forward. So did she. They stood close now, eyes locked, hearts bare. And this time, no one pulled away. He reached for her hand. She let him. There were still questions. Still challenges. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Because they had made their choice. Not just to fall, but to stay. And as David pulled her gently into his arms, Maria felt something settle inside her. This wasn't just the end of a business trip. It was the beginning of something neither of them saw coming, but both of them were finally ready to choose. Love isn't always simple. Sometimes it takes crossing lines, breaking barriers, and facing our deepest fears to discover what we truly want. Maria and David's journey reminds us that when it comes to love, no matter how hard we try to resist it, sometimes we have to choose it, fully and without hesitation. But what about you? Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between staying safe or taking a leap into the unknown? When was the last time you felt something real, even if it scared you? Maria made her choice, and David took the risk. Would you? What would you do if you were in their shoes? If you enjoyed this story and want more heartfelt, dramatic love tales, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Share your thoughts in the comments. How far would you go for love? And remember, new stories are just a click away, so stay tuned for more. Subscribe now and join our romantic journey.